The Twilight Saga, a series of books and movies about the touching love story of a boring, creepy, and rich 117-year-old vampire man and a boring 17-year-old girl, have both captivated and disgusted millions of people around the world. Regardless of what we think about this laughable bad series of books and films, we must admit that it is not only part of pop culture history, but also extremely problematic. Discussions and analysis about this saga of books and movies are everywhere. Most of them are about how bad the acting and the writing are, how it is extremely sexist, how it shows pedophilia as something magical, and promotes unhealthy relationship dynamics. But what about the postcolonial analysis on the movie? I am talking about how Native Americans are portrayed in the Twilight universe. North American cinema has a long history of problematic representation of Native Americans, which is linked to the country's colonial past. Sadly, Twilight is not the exception, and today I will analyze the problematic representation of Native Americans in the Twilight universe. Am I really forcing a post-colonial perspective on these movies? Let's find out. Number 1. Native American territories in the movie and their relationship with the Cullens. As you guys know, Edward is part of the Cullens, a whole family of vampires which originally lived in Europe before moving to the United States. When they arrive at Forks, a small town located in Washington state, they encounter Native Americans and made a deal about which territories were the vampires and which were the Native Americans, who are also werewolves, but that's something we're going to talk about it later. In this distribution of territory, the Cullens kept not only the best, but also most of the areas as their territory. This adds up to the idea that Native Americans in the US have no claim to their territory, that they have and had no nations, and that colonialism was just a very peaceful process in the United States, and that locals just gave up their resources and territories to the white colonizers just because. To the eyes of the colonizer, the other will always be faceless barbarians who do weird rituals. But how come the idea of a white nation can be constructed in colonized land? According to Benedict in his book Imagined Communities, since Modern Nation is an imagined community where one nation is people with clear borders, language, religion, etc., who is us, is part of the nation, and the others are not part of the nation. And this is used as an excuse to justify colonialism and stealing territory from, in the case of the US, the First Nations. According to the colonizer, the other is incapable of creating nations that does not have the right of sovereignty. Therefore, the real history often gets concealed or even reinterpreted to defend the actions of the colonizer. And this becomes generalized ideas and stereotypes, and one of these is the idea that Native Americans just gave up their land. Think about it for a second. Does it really make sense? Now let's talk about how both groups live in society. The Cullens are not only rich, but the head of the clan is a prestigious doctor in the community. They live an affluent and prestigious life in their locality. They are mysterious, interesting, sophisticated, and wealthy. And even though they represent outdated patriarchal structures in their family, the Cullens are presented as modern and are also part of complex traditions and rules that they can experience and participate however they want. On the other hand, the Quillets, the name of the group that the Native Americans in the movies belong to, only live in reservations. away from the rest of society. Jacob only goes to the school in the reservation, and he leaves it on very rare occasions. Of course, there's nothing wrong with living in a reservation per se. The problems are that reservations are horrible colonial structures which also make Native Americans in the US as intruders in their own historic land. In the movie, they are monolith with no complexity, pure primitive, noble or violent savages, making the Native Americans in the movie the other in the Twilight universe. For example, right? Even though Jacob is a main character together with Edward and Bella in the movies and books, he's not portrayed as a complex person, unlike Edward, whose background and character is explored several times in the movie, even though he's extremely boring and basic, of course. Jacob, on the other hand, is one-dimensional and simple, a Native American boy who lives in a reservation and who is also a werewolf and fell in love with first Bella and then her daughter. And he couldn't control himself when he fell in love with a baby because he is both the noble and the violent savage. Film in general has always been an imperial tool for propaganda, and when reproducing images of the other, they show what the white gaze wants to see. And now let's talk about Native Americans as animals. I think this is the most problematic part in the whole Twilight universe. The Native Americans are wolves. Don't get me wrong, no, you need to listen to this. Jacob explains to Bella that his tribe comes from wolves. Think about it for a second. The Native Americans in the movies are animals. The Quillets are not only savages, but are also animals. And this was part of mainstream science and academia for centuries. For example, John Locke classified Native Americans in the same group as children, illiterates, and idiots. Immanuel Kant firmly believed that Native Americans have lower mental capacity than white people. A lot of the horrible things that were and are still done to this day against indigenous populations around the world have been excused with the idea that they are just a group of almost animal individuals with no historical context and with no rights to agency. Often the story of white people as werewolves is often about how they are mostly men, but since they were beaten by a werewolf, they are now a werewolf, and that they actually mostly human. In the Twilight universe, on the other hand, they are first and foremost wolves. It is part of their identity and how they are socially organized. The movies emphasize how animalistic they are, even when they are not in their werewolves forms. For example, Jacob is mostly shirtless after he transitioned into being a full werewolf. They are both hot-blooded and hot-headed and can't control themselves. And here we have the stereotype of the bloodthirsty savage, which is extremely ironic when you add it to how the Cullens, the vampires, are presented in the movies. The Cullens can control their thirst for human blood to the point that they don't only live around humans, but also the head of the family is a doctor. The kids go to school with humans, and they always manage to control themselves one way or another. And whenever they struggle, it makes them look more human and complex. Humans can change, improve, be better, and make mistakes. Carlisle's Cullen manages to suture Bella when she's bleeding. He is the ultimate civilized man. Blonde, white, rich, and respected in a community that has always embraced him and his eccentric family. Who would have thought that the love story of two people with no chemistry could not only become a part of pop culture, but would have become the subject of so much analysis, especially from a postcolonial perspective. This story hasn't aged well already, but would this analysis add more nuances and layers to why this series of films and movies and books are problematic? I don't know, but I do know that due to the way Native Americans are represented, the points I analyze in this video should be also included as valid points of why these films are problematic.